thank you everyone for joining this lovely evening, afternoon, depending on where you are. For those of you who want to play along at home, the slides are available online. Feel free to follow along there if you'd like, or just look at the screen, that's good too. There are some links in the slides to other resources. So we're going to be talking about PHP 8 tonight. My name is Larry Garfield. I'm the Director of Developer Experience at Platform.sh. We're a continuous deployment cloud hosting company. I'm also a member of the PHP Fig Core Committee and author of the book Thinking Functionally in PHP. Yes, functional programming in PHP, it's a thing. I've got a whole book on it, and I will be raffling away a copy of it at the end of the session, sponsored by Platform.sh, so stick around to the end. So let's do some history. Recent history in PHP. You had PHP 7, which came out in 2015, which you may remember if you've been around for a while, was kind of a big deal. It gave us return types, scalars, the spaceship operator, null coalesce, anonymous classes, a bunch of other features. It was a fantastic, groundbreaking release. A year later, 7.1 came out and offered us some typing improvements with nullable types, an iterable type, a void return type. 7.2 didn't actually do all that much. Honestly, the only thing I can remember from 7.2 that I really like is the object type hint. And 7.3 wasn't exciting. Cool, but it wasn't exciting. 7.4, which came out a year and a bit ago now, was when stuff started to get really exciting again. With the introduction of short lambdas, typed properties, the null coalesce assign operator, array splat. Yes, it's called array splat. That's the correct name for that, the 3 dots thing. It just was one of the most exciting releases in years. And now, at the end of 2020, right on schedule, we have PHP 8.0. What's in PHP 8.0? I've got a whole talk on the topic, and in fact, a whole book on the topic, because it's a lot. So let's jump right in. Why are you interested in PHP 8? Basically, PHP 8 is the biggest release of PHP since 7.4. What can I say? PHP is exciting. It's a good time to be a PHP developer. So what follows is what is hopefully the most entertaining changelog you've ever heard. So let's start with some of the typing system improvements. Biggest one here, union types. People have been asking about this one for years. You can now type a parameter or return type with multiple types at the same time, with a pipe character between them, meaning or. So in this case, $users can be a string or an array, but not an integer or a float or an object or anything like that. Just string or array. And then it's up to you to figure out what to do with those 2 different types of input. When do you want to do that? This is a good example. There are plenty of terrible examples of when to use union types. Good examples are, I've seen this pattern a lot, pass one thing or several things, and then you upcast a single thing to multiple. Another one, if you're doing some kind of operation where you want a number, but it really doesn't matter if it's an integer or a float, you can now say, I'll take an integer or a float, and I can do math on both of those, so cool. You can also vary what your return is. So this opens up a whole new way to do structured pipelines in middleware, because you can say, I can return different things, but not anything, just a request or a response. I'll take a request and I either give back a request or a response. And then I can branch my other logic based on, do I get back a request or a response? And I'm guaranteed it's only one of those 2 things. So this gives us a more expressive way to describe more robust APIs. You can absolutely go overboard and create horrible designs that will just take any old thing. The answer there is, well, don't do that. There are also some specialty unions that are available now. For example, you can have a type of null, which is the same thing as the nullable question mark type. But you can now say request interface or response interface or null, which is the same thing as just doing a question mark. You can also have a return type of false, not a parameter type, just a return type. Boolean we've been able to do since PHP 7, but you can now specify false specifically. You should never do so. This is there only to support PHP built-in functions, many of which return false as an error code. They will return a real meaningful value or false on error. This means that those can now be specified in stubs in the language as false or a string, false or an integer or whatever. Returning false as an error condition, if the other option is not true, is always wrong. That is always a bug. There is no exception to that statement. Yes, that means all of these PHP internal functions are buggy, but API breaks, we can't change them. So be aware that it exists, but never use it. What you may want to use, however, is mixed. You can now specify a parameter type or return type of mixed, which means literally anything. It's the union of int, float, string, object, array, resource, null. I think I forgot one, but all of them. It effectively is the same as not putting a type in, but it means you can now say, I didn't just forget about typing, I literally will accept anything here. There are not many use cases for that, but they do exist, and you can now make that explicit. So basically, there is now no situation in which you should not type a parameter or return. There is now always some parameter type that, or some type declaration that will fit your use case. In fact, when returning, there's even static. You can now specify a return type of static on a function or method, or on a method specifically, excuse me, which indicates what is going to get returned is an instance of the class that this object is an instance of, not the class that this function is defined on. What that means is chainable methods now work. So you can have an interface that has a method that's going to return this essentially, but you can type it as returning the object, not an instance of task builder. So now in 8.0, you can say, call add step, and your IDE will know that what comes back is important task, not just the interface, which very often ends up being very important when you have builder objects. Speaking of types, you can also now implement this stringable interface. The toString method, which has been around for years, like decades, now has an interface to go with it called stringable. You don't have to use it. The toString method still works exactly the same without it. So why would you? Because union types. And you can now type a parameter as string or stringable, meaning I will accept an actual literal string or an object that can get cast to a string when I use it as a string. In the past, if you used string, it could only mean a real string, not a stringable object. What's more, this is automated. Any object or any class that has a toString method automatically implements stringable. You can implement it yourself. In fact, I think you should for better explicitness, but every object out there today that has a toString method will pass a stringable type check and it will work with the show message function now. That said, please do not overuse toString. It is only useful when you're dealing with an object that has one clear, obvious string representation, like a URL or an IP address. It is not for debugging. It is not for compiling a template. It is specifically for a value object that has one very specific and universal string version. We're just getting started. Speaking of strings, we have some new string functions that we can play with. These came from separate RFCs, in fact. First, we now have a str starts with. So it does exactly what you'd expect. You give it a string, you give it a needle, returns true if that first string starts with a second string. There's also a str ends with, which does the same thing for the end of the string instead. These work on a case-sensitive string in basic ASCII, which is fine because it's doing a byte-wise comparison, so it will still work correctly on complex non-ASCII strings. And if you care about the case, then just cast them both to lowercase or uppercase first. You don't need a separate function for that. Even more important, though, is str contains. Str contains does what it says on the tin. Does this string appear in this other string? What all of this means, aside from just being a couple of useful functions, you never have to run into this problem again. There are basically two types of developers in PHP, those who have made this mistake and those who are going to lie and pretend they haven't. Where you use strpos to say, hey, does this value appear in this other value? But you have to check against triple equal false, not double equal false, because otherwise something that begins the string will return 0 because that's its position, which is also false because dagnabbit PHP. So that problem no longer exists. You just use str contains, which returns a Boolean, which is what you wanted 98% of the time. Problem solved. Speaking of strings, however, there's lots of string improvements. How about numeric strings? What's a numeric string? A numeric string in PHP is a string that is kind of a number, and so we're going to pretend that it's a number and just use it as though it were a number and say that's close enough, whatever. And this is the source of so many problems because many strings kind of look like numbers but aren't, which means in PHP 7, you get some really weird results. Like the number 0 is in fact equal to a string that does not begin with a number, including the empty string. And a number is equal to a string if the string begins with that number. White space at the beginning of a string that contains numbers is automatically ignored, but trailing white space is sometimes ignored and sometimes not. Why? Because reasons. Worst of all, you end up with weirdness like 0 is in the array ABC because in array does a weak comparison, double equal, not triple equal. And so does 0 double equal A? Well, A folds to 0. And so yes. This is ridiculous. Fortunately, this is now changed in PHP 8. In PHP 8, a numeric string is now defined as if you take the string, strip all white space from the beginning and end, is everything that is left numeric, meaning digits, possibly with a minus sign, possibly with an E for exponents. So 1.3 E4 is a numeric value, but that is a very clear numeric value. You're not going to lose data. White space is now ignored consistently in all cases. And if something is not fully numeric, it's not numeric. None of this semi-numeric nonsense anymore. Which means when you compare a string and a number, if the string is numeric, meaning it is just numeric values only, then it will compare as a number. So in the first case here, we will be comparing int 42 with whatever a num is. If the string is not, then we convert the number to a string. So if a num is 12, the number 12, then that converts to the number, excuse me, that converts to the string 1, 2. And then we compare that string with the string ABC as strings. So it's always compared in a consistent and logical type. In function arguments, though, a numeric string in weak mode is fine, but a string that is not fully numeric because it contains non-numeric values anywhere in it is going to be a type error even in weak mode. This is a change from previous versions where that would sometimes pass the number 42 and just lose the rest of that string. Now, that said, go ahead and enable the strict types in all of your code everywhere because that will get you better code. End of story. So this is an improvement, but it's an improvement that if you're writing clean code, you're not going to run into as often. How about matches? I like to play with matches. Do you like to play with matches? I maybe shouldn't admit to that. Never mind. I like to use code like this. I tend to write this style a lot, where I have some value. I need to assign a value to one of two different things. And I'll say, all right, check some Boolean, and then using a ternary, say, all right, if the value is true, make it this thing. If it's false, assign it to this other thing. I like this approach. It gives you a nice, clear branching expression to branch as an expression, which means it encourages you to write simple expressions, simple one-line expressions. If something is too complicated to fit into this, because it's just multiple lines, that logic belongs in its own function, and you should factor that out to another function. And then you have this nice, clean piece of code. That kind of built-in feedback to encourage you towards clean code is a good thing. That's one of the things I like about this style. Problem: this only works if the check you're making is true false. It does not work if it's not a binary question. It does not work if there's 3 or more options. Fortunately, we now have match expressions, which let you do the same thing for any number of values. So the syntax is match some value, which will then get triple equal matched against each left-hand side. And then if it matches triple equal, it will return whatever's on the right-hand side. There's also no fall through. So you notice there's no break statement here. It's just if isAdmin evaluates to true, that branch is executed and returned to display, and nothing else happens. We're done. It's always just a single selection match. It also has to be exhaustive. If you had, say, instead of true and false here, you had A, B, C, and the value is D, that'll throw an exception because it means your code is wrong. There's a logic error. You should go fix that. You don't get that fall through you do with switch. Which means you can take a ugly switch statement like this that is just procedurally branching and assigning the values all to the same variable and collapse it to a single expression. Switch is conceptually a procedural construct where you're executing a different set of steps depending on some value. Match is a functional construct where you take input and map it to a piece of output, and that's all that happens. Which in practice is usually what you want. It's a much cleaner, more compact way of writing most logic, most multi-part logic like this. And because it does a strict check rather than a weak check and is exhaustive, it's far less bug error prone, far less likely you can have accidental bugs. You can also have compound options. So in this case, operator, if that operator is the string plus, minus, asterisk, or slash, that will evaluate to basic arithmetic. If it's percent sign, to modulus, exclamations, or negation, and anything else, if it's not one of those 6 strings, will throw a type error because you have a logic bug in your code. If you have something more complex, then just a simple true false or a simple equality check, you can match against true, kind of the inverse of what we did before, and say, all right, if count greater than 0 and count less than 10 triple equal true. Okay, and then that'll evaluate to small, and so on and so on. Note in this last case, we automatically get an error for a negative value of count because that's not accounted for in any of these arms. Therefore, that's an error condition. So this is nice. Another great feature to simplify code from the same developer actually are null-safe methods. Nulls. Now, you're good developers. You know not to use null. You know that null is terrible. Null is the billion-dollar mistake. You know that if your code has null in it, that means you're doing something wrong and need to restructure it. But not everyone knows that, which means when you're dealing with someone else's code or code that has poor error handling, you may end up with code like this, where I have to check, get a user object, and then if the user is not null, then I can get the address off it. And if the address is not null, then I can get the state off it. If the state is not null, then and you end up with this JavaScript-like pyramid of doom here. No offense to the JavaScript developers in the room. You all know that that was terrible, and that's why JavaScript doesn't do that anymore. We shouldn't do that in PHP. So let's not do this in PHP, okay? Okay. In PHP 8, we now have this short circuiting operation, null coalesce, or null safe method, excuse me. And it can be read effectively If the value on the left is null, return null, otherwise call the method on the right. Which means this one line means the exact same thing as this full slide here. It went from 10 lines of code, half of which are just curly braces, to this. And in this case, state will be an actual value or null. And it could be null if get user return null or if get address return null. It also will short circuit. So in this case, the get seasonal type function on line 2 will not get called at all if catalog is null. If catalog is null, then it'll just return null at that point without even getting to the rest of this method or the rest of this chain. Of note, though, this is only for methods and properties. It does not work for arrays. So if most popular returns an array here that doesn't have a 5 in it, then, or if it returns null, it'll still fail as it always has. One caveat here, though, is if you care whether it was catalog or get products or most popular or whatever that is null, this won't tell you. It'll just give you null regardless of where it stopped. If you care which one is null, then what you need to be using is called an either monad. And that's a different topic entirely. It's a different talk. Read my book. And shameless plug. Speaking of picky code, PHP 8 is increasingly picky. And I say that as a good thing. You want your language to be picky because a picky language is one that doesn't let you make stupid errors, and it throws an error at you before they make it into production, hopefully. So a whole bunch of warnings have been converted to error exceptions now. For example, modifying a property of non-objects. So if you do something like this, where not object is not an object, that will now throw an exception rather than just a warning. If you try to write a scalar value as an array, so something like this, that will fail. In each of these cases, what you're trying to do doesn't make any sense. So whatever the code comes after that is guaranteed to be wrong. So let's not even try running it. That's why they got promoted. Invalid argument for each. If you do something like this, this will now not try to keep going. It will, in fact, bail out with an error exception immediately. Illegal offset, something like this, where you try to pass something that is not a legal array key to an array. So division by 0 is now an error exception, not a warning, because you shouldn't do that. If you actually want to do 0 safe division, there's now an fdiv function to use instead. Meanwhile, a whole bunch of notices have been promoted to warnings because you really should know about these and you shouldn't have them turned off because you happen to have notices turned off, because these mean you're doing something wrong. Like array offset on a non-array. You're doing it wrong. Properties on non-objects, something like this, is now going to be a warning, not just a notice, because it doesn't make any sense. Trying to convert an array to a string directly is now a warning, not just a notice, because that's not a thing. Undefined properties on objects are now warnings. Even undefined variables are now warnings. Let me say that again. Undefined variables are now warnings. If your code still has undefined variables all over them that you're just using and hoping they appear, this is now a warning. So you need to fix those because they are a security hole. So don't do that. Whether you're happy about this or upset, this is now the case in PHP 8. You have to define your variables before you try to read from them, because reading from a variable that is not defined is a security hole. Don't do that. We also have lots of commas. This doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's actually a very long and storied history to commas in PHP. It's weird. PHP is like that. Back in 2017, there was an RFC to allow trailing commas in a whole bunch of places. It was one big RFC with a separate vote for each of these: function arguments, function declarations, group namespaces, implements clauses, use clauses, class property list, the use statements on a closure. All of these are cases where you have to have a comma between each item, but not after the last item. That's a syntax error, which is a real pain in the butt. If you've ever worked with JSON and you know, oh, I have to go back and add a comma because I'm adding another item, and that just makes your diffs harder. It's one more thing to remember. It makes it harder to reorganize things. So why can't we just allow those the way we do in arrays? And that's the idea. And this RFC went to a vote, and exactly excuse me, exactly one of these actually passed. Guess which one? The one that nobody ever uses. Because PHP, I don't know. However, in PHP 7.3, there was another RFC to just add the trailing comma for function arguments. And that passed 3-1. Why? I don't know. That had actually failed previously on its own in 2013, but now it came back and was successful in 7.3, despite failing twice before that. I don't know why. In PHP 8, we had new RFCs, separate RFCs, for adding a trailing comma in the function definition when that passed. And another one for trailing commas in a use statement in a closure, and that passed. In fact, they passed with only one dissenting vote on the first one. The first one passed 58-1. The second one passed 49-0. Why? Because PHP. I don't know. PHP is a weird community. What can I say? But it now means that when you have a constructor that you're listing vertically, or any function that you're listing vertically, you can now have a comma on every item, including the last one, and that's okay. Not required, but it is now optional to include that. It's just one less thing to have to think about. And that's true for the use statement as well in a closure. So line 12, you have an extra comma there. Really only useful if you're doing things vertically. But we're going to start doing things vertically a lot more often than we used to. Why? Now we get to the really fun bits. Constructor promotion. I think this is my favorite individual feature in PHP 8, to be perfectly honest. No new functionality, just nicer code. Right now, object-oriented code in PHP looks like this. And you have to repeat every one of these variables 4 frickin' times. Once as a property, once as a parameter to the constructor, once as a value inside the constructor, and once as the this reference inside the constructor. I know people who will refuse to write object-oriented code for this reason, just for this. It's that annoying. But this is what we have. And now in 8, we have this. This means the exact same thing as the previous slide. You specify the visibility in the constructor parameters, or in the constructor methods parameters, and it automatically promotes it. This means to the compiler, hey, there's going to be a property called theme that is of type theme system that is private, and the constructor will take a parameter called theme, and you should just go ahead and assign that property to that, assign that parameter to that property, because that's what I was going to do anyway. I think this is going to make all of my classes half the length, because the amount of code I had that was just shuffling stuff from the constructor to properties. Oh my God. Can you tell I like this? And of note, look on line 6, that trailing comma after modules. Trailing commas were added for this reason, because we started working on this and we're going to have a lot of commas here. Can we just fix this trailing comma thing? Sure, let's fix this trailing comma thing. So, yay. You can also mix and match them. You can still have a real constructor. The constructor can be an empty body, or it can have a body in it that does whatever you feel like, just like now. You can also have only some parameters to the constructor promoted and not others. That's fine. Anything that doesn't have a visibility tag on it works exactly the same as it always has. The one caveat, well, there's 2 caveats. One, you cannot promote a callable typed argument, because you cannot type a object property as callable for implementation reasons. In the engine, it gets confused with methods. I'm not going to get into that, but you can't auto promote a callable. And you cannot specify the same property both in the constructor and independently. It'll just give you a syntax error. Okay, cool. What that means though is we get really nice value objects. This gives us, just in 12 lines of code, an object with, what is that, 8, something like that, properties on it, and a constructor that will handle them. And we're done. That's the whole class. That's the joke. Arguably, we can make these private and then have getters on them as well if we want. That's a different debate. But just declaring them and passing them in is now super easy. That said, let's get a little meta. And by a little, I mean a lot. Who's used doctrine annotations before? I can't actually see a show of hands because this is a video, but I'm sure some of you have used doctrine annotations before. Well, they're now in core. Only better, they're called attributes. And instead of being part of a doc block, they use this kind of Rust-like syntax. We actually borrow the syntax from Rust. These are not comments. These are attributes. Attributes are metadata on some other part of the language that you can access through reflection. The syntax happens to be a comment in older versions of PHP, so you can start adding these now as long as they're single line, but they can be multiple line because these attributes could be just a basic string that you read through reflection, or they could be a class. They could be a class that you then pass parameters to and load as an object through reflection and then do stuff with. It's hard to explain in the abstract. So as an example, this is code out of Tukio, which is my PSR 14 event dispatcher reference implementation. It has this method called add listener on it, on a listener provider. Listener is just an event listener. And in this case, it's just a function. And add listener takes a callable, a priority, an ID, and the events class to listen to. Only the first is required, the others are optional and not necessarily the order that you want them in. So wouldn't it be more convenient to put some of those, like the ID, on the listener itself? So I don't have to redefine it, I can just get that ID from the listener itself. All right, let's do that. First, we define a new attribute. An attribute can be just a string or a class that doesn't have an interface necessarily, but has itself an attribute of, well, attribute. Attribute being a class, and so you have to use it or have a backslash. It evaluates to all the same namespacing rules as classes do. The constructor of that class can be whatever you want. In this case, there's two possible properties, ID and type, and that's all I need. And I can use Constructor Promotion to just promote those. So I have an object that is going to collect two specific values, both of which are nullable strings. Cool. This is just used internally, so it's not an API anyone should be looking at, so it's safe to make these properties public. If you disagree, cool, make them private, add some other methods. Your attribute class can be as complex as you want or as simple as you want. In this case, all I need is the properties, but you can put any other methods on here you feel like. You can also restrict the listener to only apply on functions and methods. There are just constants. It's a bit flag constant. And you can specify on targets, methods, classes, properties, constants, or arguments to functions. You can put attributes on arguments to functions, which is more than doctrine allows you to do. In this case, I only want functions and methods to be tagged as listeners, not a whole class. So that's what I do. And it'll be then an error if I try to use it elsewhere. Then I go to that listener, that function, and give it an attribute. And I say it's a listener, instance of Krell Tukio listener. And it has one parameter, listener A, the string. And now that maps directly to the constructor. Done. On its own, this does nothing. What you can then do is inside add listener, you can use reflection to access the attributes and do other stuff if you feel like it. So this is kind of a simplified version of what Tukio does. If the listener that's passed in is a function, then we call a reflection function on it, get its attribute. Specifically, I only want attributes that are of the listener class, or it's actually an interface, or children thereof. And that's what that is. You can have multiple attributes on the same language construct, but I only care about mine. I only care about listener. So if someone has it tagged with something else for another library, cool, it doesn't affect me. That gets me back. Get attributes returns an array of attribute reflection, reflection attribute objects. And I then just iterate over all of those and call new instance on it. I'm using it using array map for that. And now attributes here on line 11 is an array of listener objects. Is an array of instances of Krell Tukio listener. And I can then do whatever I want with those and provide default values. I can take other action. I can register things. That's then up to you. All that's in the core is that engine and the reflection to say, hey, I want to pull this in a structured fashion and get an object out of it. What you then do with it, it's up to you. This can directly replace doctrine annotations. In fact, because both doctrine annotations and attributes map to arbitrary PHP classes, in Symfony 5.2, all of their attributes, all of their doctrine annotation classes are now also attributes. You can use the new attribute syntax instead and not even trigger the doctrine annotations library, but you still get all the same functionality. Use the same class for it, all the same API after that. However, you can go a step further. If you look on line 8 here and tag even the parameter itself to say, hey, this needs to be the current user. What is Symfony then going to do with these? Whatever Symfony wants to do with them. Cool. You can also then tag arguments to the constructor that are promoted. But we said before that you can set an attribute to apply only to certain types of constructs. So is this going to apply to the property or to the parameter? Because those are different things. Good question. The decision was to apply it to both because that made the most sense, or at least it didn't make the least sense or something. So in this case, if you were to reflect on the point class and the constructor, the positive attribute would be on both the constructor parameter and the property. And finally, let's have an argument. You know, the hardest problems in computer science, of course, naming things, cache invalidation, off by one errors. The reason for the first one is that it's hard to name things when you can't see them. You need to understand them. But when you're calling a function, you don't necessarily understand it. This is just the 3 numbers. Is this going to give me an array of 50, 100 times, or array of 150 times? It's not obvious. You have to go look at the documentation. That's a problem. Now you can say it explicitly. As of PHP 8.0, all functions and methods support named arguments. It matches on the parameter name defined in the function or method itself. And you can mix and match them. So you can have the first few parameters be positional and then named after that. And the named ones can be in any order. So this is not the actual order that the parameters are in, but that's fine. These are the names that those values, those variables have in the API, in the function definition. Therefore, I can put them in any order I want, provided that all of the positional ones come first and then all of the named ones. So the second example is not actually valid, but you could put a number first and then 2 things with named values, named arguments. Also note, again, commas, because you're going to be writing vertical code more. This comma is going to be very important. But what happens with Variatics? Okay, they do arguably what makes the most sense. It means that if you have a numeric array, a positional array, and you pass that with a splat operator on line 3, then it will pass in positionally. If you have a named array, it will pass in as named arguments and match them up by name regardless of their position, which to me makes sense. And if you have something that is mixed, well, it will either be valid because you have things in the right position, or it will not make any sense and will give you an error, and then you should fix that because what you're doing doesn't make any sense. This also opens up an interesting possibility for dynamic arguments. So you can just put together an args array based on some logic and then pass that to a function with splat. And it doesn't matter the order you put things together in. You have a self-documenting built-up call. Now, should you be using an array here, or should you be converting this to a proper object and calling methods on it that way? Different debate. Depends on the situation. I'm not going to get into that. We don't have time for that, but it's a thing. What's even more important, more impressive, are value objects. You often have objects that have lots of parameters in their constructor because, well, it's a complex object, like a URL, has lots of pieces to it. But the natural order of them has no bearing on when you're going to use them. I'm pretty much never going to use the authority or user info properties in a URL, but I have to still have them there. So do we put those at the end, even though the end is all the way over there? That's then out of position based on the way a URL actually works. What if I have a case where I actually am using the authority all the time? This is gross. And in PHP 7, what you have to do is something like this, and just pass a whole bunch of the default values in for arguments that you have to go look up. And that's gross. In PHP 8, you can just name the pieces you care about and ignore the rest and put them in whatever order you want. And it might make more sense vertically. Okay, make it vertical. And now, rather than having to specify all of these defaults, I can just say, boom, object done. You don't need to pass in an array and lose all of your type capabilities. You have a self-documenting, completely refactorable, type-safe way to define an object in line. The main argument for this came out of a blog post that I wrote last year called Improving PHP's Object Ergonomics, where I went through a whole bunch of different proposals that people had at the time for making objects easier to work with. And what I came down to in my recommendation was all of these one-off tools are not a good approach, but if we can combine named arguments and constructor promotion, then it gives us this. It gives us this really compact way to define an object and this really compact way to use an object. And together, they result in a really nice experience. In fact, another place you're going to use named arguments a lot are in attributes. Doctrine annotations will do this, and you can do them in PHP now because, well, it's just a constructor. It's just a method call. Therefore, the same thing works. So you can make these multi-line if you want or not, up to you. Do note if you make it multi-line like this, that it will be a parse error in older versions of PHP because only line 3 would get read as a comment. The others would just be random text there. Honestly, I think this is going to be the most common place that named arguments get used. They should not get used everywhere. They should only get used in places where they make sense, where they actually clarify things, like attributes or value objects, or honestly, the most important place, the place where named arguments are going to be most valuable to the PHP ecosystem. Which comes first, needle or haystack? I don't know. I don't care. I can just specify them by name. Go away. So now all those PHP haters, you have an answer for them. Which order is it, needle or haystack? It's whichever you want. Take your pick. Just name it. One caveat, though. This does mean that parameter names are now part of your interface contract. If you change the name of a parameter to your method, you are now changing the interface. Ish. It will not actually trigger a compile error for the interface itself, but someone trying to call your method with named arguments using the old name will now break. So caveat emptor, be aware of that. make sure you give your parameters good names that would make sense if called in a with a named argument, because people are going to do so. And that's PHP 8. And oh, right, JIT. Yeah, this is also this thing called a JIT, or just-in-time compiler. This is an advanced feature. It's the configuration for it is advanced. It's disabled by default, but you can turn it on if you need to. The idea here is instead of PHP, well, normally PHP gets converted to opcodes, very low-level alternate syntax, essentially, and then that gets interpreted and run at runtime. What a JIT does is analyze your code as it's running and say, you know what, these same 50 opcodes get running one after another. I'm going to optimize those and compile those down to machine code and swap that in place in memory. And so the next time that line of 50 gets called, I'm just going to run this machine code instead, and it gets faster. How much of a benefit this is going to be for web requests is unclear. Your typical WordPress or Drupal or Typo3 site will probably not see a ton of improvement from that. Maybe some, but not a ton. It's one of the reasons it's disabled by default. However, for persistent processes in, say, Swole or React PHP or AMP, or for command line tools that are doing a lot of heavy lifting, like static analyzers, like Composer, if you want to write machine learning libraries in PHP, those are all cases where we probably will see a big improvement. The author of one static analyzer library found that with the JIT enabled at full setting, or full aggressive settings, he got a 50% performance improvement, which is huge. So the JIT is not as much about making your WordPress site faster as it is making it possible to use PHP for more types of things you wouldn't have thought to use PHP for. So take a machine learning library written in PHP. Yes, they exist. Run that. It'll get fast. You can now do machine learning in PHP in a performant fashion. Now we're talking. In summary, then, in PHP 8, you have to write half as much code. The code you do write is going to be much more self-descriptive. Beware of undefined variables because they are now a warning deal. And you don't need to care about needle and haystack anymore because you can put them in any order you want. Thank you. That's PHP 8. If you want more on PHP 8, check out the book, Exploring PHP 8, published by Platform SH. It is a free ebook. You just have to fill out a form on our website. I'll drop a link into the chat here. As I said, I'm also the author of Thinking Functionally in PHP. Link to that as well. And I think we're going to raffle off a copy of that now. So I think the way we're going to do this is with a quiz, I think we said.
Yeah, that's right.
All right. So I'm going to ask a question, and whoever puts the right answer into the chat first wins. And then just send me your email address so that I can send you a coupon code for it. Who is the most prolific contributor to PHP 8 according to the number of RFCs authored? Just go ahead and put the...
Well, we have an answer.
It's not me. Looks like... we'll go with that. Mark Baker. Nikita Popov. Nikki C is his handle. Nikita Popov is the only person I know of who is actually paid to work on PHP full-time. He is funded by JetBrains to do so. His day job at NetBrains is go make PHP cooler, which is just the most awesome job in the world. So thank you, Mark. Shoot me your email address. I guess Twitter DM is fine. You know where to find me. And I'll send you a coupon for the book. Yes, some of the slides are there. They're already online. Feel free to go through them. And happy to take questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Larry. That's been really, really insightful. I've learned a lot this evening. I was just going to look at the Q&A and a couple of questions in there. First question, are union types chainable?
Chainable as in, can you do type A or type B or type C? Assuming that's what is meant by chainable, then yes.
Yes, that's
so yeah, you can do something like int or string or float, something like that. Totally legal. Yeah.
Cool. And the second question, does stru contains work with multi-byte sequences?
Yes, because it is not comparing characters. It's actually doing a byte comparison for the start or end of the string. So a multi-byte string should work just fine because it's just doing a byte comparison. That is my understanding anyway.
Okay. That's all the questions in the Q&A. Has anyone else in the chat got any other questions for Larry?
So there were a bunch of comments flying by while I was
talking.
there
were lots of comments going past as you were speaking. I'll just throw in my thoughts as well. I really like the idea of the match instead of the switch, and the constructor promotion looks really cool too.
Yeah, those, I love both of those.
I'm totally on the fence about the trailing commas, but I think that's just
when you're doing things vertically, trailing commas make it just so much more consistent and convenient. Just like they use the in arrays, if you're defining an associative array and you do that vertically, you put a comma on every line, including the last line. You can note the same thing. I do have a question here from Robin. Will undefined parameter names be ignored or throw a warning? If you have a parameter that is required and you don't provide it, it will still error just like it always has. It doesn't matter if you're using positional or named arguments for that. Possible typo on a slide. I will double check that. Let's actually go ahead and double check that. No. Where was it? Mark, do you remember which section it was in? It was after the commas. If you want to do it the easy way, see behind the curtain here. This one. Yep, that's a typo. I'll fix that.
Cool. Any more comments, questions? Okay.
I think this will cause issues. Oh dear. You're nerd sniping me now. Get ID. If your ID is 0. I'm not sure. There might be some edge cases like that where if you're being fast and loose with falsy values, that they might cause an error. That one in particular, I'm not sure, but those are the kind of small issues that you may see in a .0 release of PHP. So I don't know. I'd actually have to verify that that the behavior changes. And if there's a problem, it's going to depend on the code base. Question from Mark. What is the rationale behind not allowing attribute code to be triggered at runtime? I'm not sure what you mean. It's just metadata. So it doesn't do anything until you ask for it, but then it will actually run the constructor at that point. So can you clarify what you mean there?
Hopefully you should be able to unmute if you want, Mark.
Yeah, go ahead and unmute. while Mark's answering that, question from Jonathan. I think the question before meant what happens if you provide a named parameter where there is no parameter with that name. I think that just gets ignored if you have extra arguments. I haven't tested that, but I'm pretty sure that's what happens. Just like if you have a function that takes 2 arguments and you pass it 7, it just ignores the last 5. All right. Nothing else from Mark, so I think that covers it. Will the Jit compiler help with FPM? It'll run under FPM. It's all in the engine, but again, it's without getting into too much detail about the guts of it. For the Jit to have an effect, it has to be looking at code that has run several times, and it can't help with I/O. Most FPM applications, most of the time is spent waiting on the database or waiting on a web service or something like that, and Jit's not going to do anything for that. If you have a piece of the application that is executed a whole bunch of times on every request, it'll probably help with that. But I don't believe any data is maintained from one run to the next. So the improvements on FPM will be there, but not huge. And yeah, you wait until clients update their servers to PHP 8, or just convince them to use Platform SH. We already offer PHP 8. We've offered every new PHP version in the last 5 years, day of release. So I'm in the developer relations team. These kind of plugs are my job.
Lovely. If there's no more questions, we'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much again, Larry, for speaking this evening.